I wanted to share with you just some observations that I've kind of made over the years, and I don't know, maybe it'll give you a new perspective on just kind of what you're dealing with when it comes to taking a Filipina back to your home country, or you yourself deciding to transplant your life over to the Philippines. Now, what I've noticed over the years, after just, again, meeting so many expats and talking with them about their experiences taking a Filipina back to their home country, which, by the way, there's a misnomer that if you take a Filipina back to your home country, automatically she's going to become westernized and this horrible person. No, like with anything else, and I always keep saying this, there is no all. I know guys, my good buddy Joseph, good example, and plenty others that have taken a younger wife to the United States, and none of the things that everybody seems to be so paranoid about happened. You know, she's working. They're building a great life together. I think I met them, it was like 6-7 years ago, and they're still going strong. And again, they're living in full time in the United States, and everything's just totally copacetic. What I've noticed after, again, speaking to so many people on both sides of the equation is this. It's all a matter of perspective. It's what you're accustomed to when you were growing up, where you spent the majority of your time when you all of a sudden decide to move from one country to the next. Whether it's a Filipina in her 20s or 30s moving to the West, or say a Western man, American, Canadian, European, whatever, moving to Southeast Asia. Now, we'll start with the Filipina. Now, unless she is part of the minority few who are considered wealthy in the Philippines, more than likely, she has had a life that from day one has always involved hardship. Whether it's coming up with money to pay for medical bills, whether it's seeing her parents struggle to put food on the table. My own wife, she lost one of her brothers because they did not have the money to take him to the hospital. He passed away when he was like under 9 years old. So this is the kind of life that many Filipinos are familiar with. They see in the news entire barangays, shanty towns really, that overnight just go up in flames. One person knocks over a candle or whatever, and next thing next morning, a whole bunch of people are homeless. Same thing with the floods, which you've probably seen on the news. For them, this is like what they see every day growing up. So the perspective of a Filipina when she travels outside of the Philippines is a huge shock to the system. And I've seen it with Filipinas that I've known who worked OFW, overseas foreign worker. They took a 3-year contract usually to work overseas, a variety of countries, you name it, cruise ships, household nannies, you name it. And for the Filipinas who were daring enough to go out alone, they had to manage their money all by themselves. They would get their paycheck, and many of them faced a lot of abuse. We won't even spend time on that, but you can check it out on YouTube. A lot of these OFW Filipinas suffer just horrible abuse in every way you can think of. But not all of them, but many of them. And so here they are in another country, the Filipina, and she's got to be resourceful. She has to solve problems on her own. She has to navigate in city, walking around in a city on her day off, and find her way back home. Things that you and I might consider no big deal. Well, for a Filipina who grew up out in the province or a small part of the city, she knew every nook and cranny and street there because she grew up there. But now she's in another country. She has to manage her online banking. Many times she's sending money back to her family, but she needs a budget for herself for whatever things she needs. And what happens is this OFW Filipina gets a taste of some other country. Now, it might be Dubai, it might be Hong Kong, it could be any of a number of places, but in most cases, the infrastructure is much better than what she's used to in the Philippines. Now, she grew up in the Philippines thinking, well, yeah, it's normal. Of course, you're going to have an electrical blackout twice a month, maybe 3 times a month. It's normal that there's no water pumping for 2-3 days just because. It's normal to not see any actual traffic enforcement. You know, all these things were normal to her in the Philippines. But then she goes to work OFW, she's in a whole other country, and she gets a whole new perspective. And what I have noticed is that once these OFW Filipinas return to the Philippines, they see the Philippines with a whole new set of eyes. Now they're aware of the difference in infrastructure. I guess one side note you could take from this is if you do date an OFW Filipina, more often than not, she's going to be more responsible with money, and she will acclimate to the life of an expat a bit easier. Again, just speaking in generalities from the men that have dated women who were OFW, they have seen this trend, okay? And to me, it's a pretty good thing. Now, then there's the other Filipinas who have, again, never left the Philippines. Never. Their whole life has been in the Philippines, and that is their baseline, all the things that I mentioned. Well, then they meet an expat, and, you know, people fall in love and they get married, and then he says, hey, come back with me to, again, United States, Canada, whatever, because he's still earning an income. And so she moves there, and again, it's like being thrown in the deep end of the pool. All of a sudden, kind of has to get used to the fact that she finds that, oh, the electricity is just always on. You know, it's a big shock if once every 5 years the electricity goes out for 20 minutes. So she starts realizing that when it comes to earning potential, in the Philippines, she might earn, say, $10 to $12 a day in US dollars. Whereas in the United States, she could get just about any job, and she's going to make, say, $80 to $100 in one day. Now, mathematically, we all know that making $15, $18 an hour in the United States is not that much when you compare it to the cost of living. If she was making that kind of money in the Philippines, well, yeah, that's pretty impressive. But it's in her mind. And again, we're coming back to perspective, to the paradigm that she grew up in. In her mind, for years, that $18 an hour job is like gold. It's a rare opportunity. And this is where individual personality and integrity comes into play. If you were to look at, say, 100 people who suddenly had a large amount of money introduced to their life, a certain percentage of them would be appreciative, and they would invest it, they would be responsible in how they manage that money. And then you have this other percentage that will be the one-day millionaire. They're going to squander it. I've seen Filipinos, and not just Filipinos, but in the United States, who became wealthy compared to what they had in the Philippines, and it brought out the greed in them. They began to look down on other people based on whether they had the same amount of money or not. And they were constantly in a mindset of, you know, like I knew this one Filipina, and she used to work where I used to work at there in California. And she was already like 58, 59 years old. She had her pension from her widowed husband who was in the Navy, plus she had his Social Security, plus she had a ton of money that they had saved in the bank. Her house was paid off, and yet she would still go to work. Why? Because she wanted to keep that money coming in. She had enough money to live another 5 lifetimes. But every day she had the same lunch. It was a paper sack with a banana, a sandwich, once in a while some cup of noodles, and that's what she ate all the time. She wanted to spend as little on her lunch as possible. Why? Because she had this mindset of just hoarding money in. So that's one perspective of how a Filipina goes to the West and depending on her character, is either going to appreciate this opportunity and use it wisely, or the internal greed and lack of integrity starts to come out. It's like alcohol. Too much of anything, really. You give a person too much time on their hands, too much alcohol, too much food, too much power, too much money, and whatever is the weak link in their personal character, it gets exaggerated, it gets magnified. And you've probably seen this plenty of times where you had a coworker who was your coworker, all of a sudden they get promoted and now they're treating you like crap. The power just goes to their head. So now let's look at this from the expat's point of view. Now, the expat, before he's an expat, he grows up in his home country. Let's just kind of use America, United States, since I'm familiar with that, and spends his whole life, maybe till he's 49, 50, 60 years old, spends his whole life grinding it out, waking up, starting his day, 5 o'clock in the morning, get some coffee, get in traffic, go to work, deal with the boss and deal with the stress and have maybe a few 30 minutes or so to wolf down his lunch or whatever, and then back to work and then back into the traffic and then stopping at the store for this and that and whatever. We're used to it. It's a very stressful life. We're constantly trying to keep problems from occurring. We're like, well, there's traffic, so which route can I take that's going to be the fastest, so that I don't end up stuck in traffic on the freeway or whatever. Our brain is just constantly, whether we realize it or not, we're just constantly dealing with inner office politics. We get home and then you sit down at the end of the day with the computer and you're like, okay, now I gotta do the budget for the month. Okay, this has to be paid, and oh geez, there's a shortage here. Okay, we're not gonna pay that, and you gotta do that whole song and dance. We get used to it. And like in my own personal life, I found that I reached this apex where I was getting paid really well. I was getting big bonuses. I had lots of vacation, roughly 5 to 8 weeks, depending on how you counted it. Personal vacation, holidays, all that. I had a 1-acre home. I had 2 investment properties. I had everything just going about the best that I'd ever had in my life. But those years were about the most stressful in my whole lifetime. I was landlord to 2 properties, and that came with a whole ball of problems that I wouldn't wish on most anybody. And those of you who have done real estate and rented out properties know what I'm talking about. I won't even go into that. But I had, 5 kids under my roof. I had full-time job. I was running a business. I was stretched to the limit. And I look at my life now where I wake up, I'm in the province, it's beautiful, it's green, it's stress-free. The properties, I've already gotten rid of all those a long time ago. Why do I have this perspective now that less is more to me? And so many expats I've talked to, so many feel the same way. They have done it. They have grabbed the brass ring. They have met their goals. And when you start weighing out the amount of stress that comes with the amount of success as defined by the American dream, well, at some point, most of us just realize it's not worth it. But most Americans figure, well, there is no alternative. This is life. This is how it is. If you want to have a bunch of nice things, you got to go into debt. You got to do this and do that and push yourself, no time to rest, and, all that. But for those of us who have discovered and stumbled onto the idea of becoming an expat, living in another country that it's a lower cost of living, but it's also, in one sense, a lower standard of living when you're talking about infrastructure. But it's a higher standard of living when you gauge it by personal satisfaction, reduction in stress, which overall is going to help you with your health and your longevity, because all that stress does catch up with you. Here you've got, say, an American like myself who grew up with all this stress, who grew up having nice things. And when we traveled and went to Southeast Asia, or at least in my case, yes, the infrastructure was not so great, but my stress level went down like to a fraction, 2% of what it was in the United States. Now, I always hear, and I've discussed the warts of being an expat, and like I said, the brownouts and the inefficiency, the lack of infrastructure, the whole long list. But the thing is, the trade-off based on my upbringing, living in a high stress sort of situation, the trade-off for me is opposite of the Filipina. My calculation of the situation is I will gladly put up with some brownouts. I will gladly put up with an absence of a lot of the first world amenities in order to gain a simpler, happier, more peaceful life. And that's not even counting for you single guys, the ability to either stay a committed bachelor and have a different date as often as you want, or if you're interested in marriage, to find a good woman. But the thing is, you're going to have a very hard time finding that in United States, Canada, Europe. Yeah, there's a few good women out there, and you're going to be competing with a lot of guys for those few women. Whereas here in the Philippines, there's an abundance of good women with good integrity, good character. I know that may be like really hard for you to believe if you have not traveled, but it's the truth. So that brings me back to the issue of perspective. For a Filipina, leaving the Philippines to a, let's just say, first world country, a country that's already developed with high infrastructure, for her, that's a dream come true. And that's totally understandable. But for men like us who have already done it, we've already kind of won the game at our own level. And then we come to the Philippines, and yeah, there's the wonkiness and whatnot, but you know what? It's a great life. I know so many guys just on this island that we hang out, we have lunch, and we're in no hurry. We'll sit there and talk about everything under the sun for 3 hours, and it just flies right by. Meanwhile, we're having some lunch. Sometimes we meet at the restaurants at the resorts. Sometimes we'll meet, at whatever nice restaurant that's, nearby. But we're in no hurry, and we're having a great time. We're not stressed about schedules. We're not stressed about money. We're not stressed about relationships. Well, some guys are. But it's a good life, even when you calculate in the weirdness of living in a developing country. So this is the observation I've come to after, again, years of talking to expats and Filipinas that have gone outside the Philippines, and they loved it, and they don't want to come back. There are some that want to come back because after building a life with an expat in the Western world, they've done it enough that they miss the simplicity of living in the Philippines. And they and their husband come back to the Philippines, quote unquote, rich, and they can buy a nice home out in the province, have a wonderful life, and they end up really experiencing the best of both worlds. I know so many couples that have done this. And some that I was just talking to this week, that's their plan. They're going to get to a certain point financially and build a house here in the Philippines, which will cost a fraction of what it would in the United States, and it'll be paid off, no mortgage, and they're going to enjoy the fruits of their labor here in the Philippines. So I'm interested in your thoughts. What do you see for your future? What have you experienced so far when it comes to travel? And if you have not yet traveled, if you have spent your entire life in your own home country, understand that you're looking at life kind of like through a peephole. You've only seen part of the picture. Once you've traveled, you start getting a bigger picture about all the options that are available. And then you can recalculate things and go, well, maybe moving overseas is just the ticket I need. So, love to hear your thoughts. See you there in the comments.